The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Naco, Arizona Territory. But Sadie Thompson barely flinched as she continued sweeping the wooden porch of the boarding house. Life on the border in 1883 had hardened her to such disturbances, just as surely as it had hardened her heart to the possibilities of love or happiness. At 32, she considered herself long past such luxuries, despite the fact that some might still call her beautiful with her chestnut hair and green eyes that had once sparkled with youthful optimism. The commotion down the street grew louder, and Sadie paused her sweeping to watch as a crowd gathered outside the saloon. Another brawl, no doubt. Such was life in a border town like Naco, where cowboys, miners, and all manner of rough men congregated to spend their hard-earned wages on whiskey and women. She had seen enough of such men in her lifetime to last several lifetimes over. Sheriff Mason appeared, dispersing the crowd with his usual efficiency. Sadie admired the older man's ability to maintain some semblance of order in this lawless place. As the crowd thinned, she noticed a stranger standing apart from the others. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent beneath the harsh desert sun, he cut an imposing figure even from a distance. The stranger turned, and for a brief moment, his eyes met hers across the dusty street. Sadie quickly looked away, resuming her task with renewed vigor. Men like that meant trouble, and she'd had her fill of trouble. "Miss Thompson, are you planning to wear a hole in my porch with that broom?" Mrs. Halloway called from the doorway, her thin lips pursed in disapproval. "Sorry, madam," Sadie replied, forcing a smile, "just making sure it's thoroughly clean." "Well, when you're done playing with the dirt, there are beds to be made and floors to be mopped inside." Sadie nodded obediently. Mrs. Halloway wasn't an unkind employer, merely exacting in her expectations. And the boarding house job, complete with a small room of her own, was the most respectable position Sadie had managed to secure in years. She wouldn't jeopardize it by complaining about the endless work, as Mrs. Halloway disappeared back into the shadowy interior of the boarding house. Sadie risked another glance toward the saloon. The stranger was gone, but Sheriff Mason was walking in her direction. "Afternoon, Miss Thompson," he greeted, tipping his hat politely. "Sheriff," she acknowledged with a nod. "Another dispute at Malone's, just the usual disagreement over cards," he sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Nothing I haven't seen 100 times before. Any casualties? Just a few bruised egos and one broken nose." The sheriff chuckled, then grew serious. "I came by to let you know that we've got some new arrivals in town. Cattle outfit from Texas stopping over on their way north. They'll likely be staying at the boarding house." Sadie's heart sank. Cowboys meant noise, dirt, and often unwanted attention. "I'll let Mrs. Halloway know." "Good." "And Sadie," he lowered his voice, "the foreman seems a decent sort, name's Preston Evans, might be worth keeping an eye on the others, though." "I always do, Sheriff," she replied, her voice flat. After the sheriff departed, Sadie leaned the broom against the wall and took a moment to straighten her simple blue dress and tuck a stray strand of hair back into her neat bun. Cowboys or not, she had work to do, and dwelling on potential problems wouldn't help. Inside, the boarding house was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. Mrs. Halloway was already discussing arrangements with a man whose back was turned to Sadie as she entered. "We can accommodate your men in the 2 large rooms at the back," Mrs. Halloway was saying. "Though I must insist they remove their boots before traipsing through my hallways." The man chuckled, a deep, rich sound that caused Sadie to pause. "I'll make sure they understand the rules, madam. They're good men, despite their rough edges." Mrs. Halloway noticed Sadie hovering in the doorway. "Ah, here's my assistant now. Sadie, this is Mr. Evans. He and his men will be staying with us for a few weeks." The man turned, and Sadie found herself looking into the same piercing blue eyes that had caught her attention earlier. Up close, Preston Evans was even more imposing, tall and solid, with dark blonde hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Unlike many cowboys, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke of confidence rather than bravado. "Miss Thompson," he said, extending a calloused hand, "a pleasure to meet you." Sadie hesitated before briefly touching his hand. "Mr. Evans." She kept her voice cool and professional. "I'll prepare the rooms immediately." "No rush," he replied with an easy smile. "The men are still settling the cattle at the holding pens outside town, Mrs. Holloway interjected. "Sadie, please show Mr. Evans to the front room. He'll be taking that one for himself." The front room was the nicest in the house, with 2 windows and actual wallpaper, a luxury in Naco. Sadie led the way upstairs, acutely aware of the heavy footsteps behind her. "You've been in Naco long?" Preston Evans asked as they reached the landing. "Long enough," she replied, not inviting further conversation. If he noticed her reluctance to engage, he didn't show it. "It's a growing town, positioned well for trade with the border so close." Sadie unlocked the door to the front room and stepped aside. "Clean linens are provided weekly. Breakfast is served at 6, dinner at 6 in the evening, no cooking in the rooms, no women visitors, no excessive drinking." She recited the rules mechanically. Preston Evans stepped into the room, glancing around with approval. "Looks comfortable enough." He set his saddlebags on the bed and turned to her. "Thank you, Miss Thompson. Will there be anything else, Mr. Evans?" Her hand was already on the doorknob, eager to escape. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "No, that'll be all for now." Sadie nodded and pulled the door closed behind her, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There was something about Preston Evans that unsettled her, and it wasn't just his good looks. He had an intensity to his gaze that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years, and that was dangerous. Being truly seen meant revealing the stains on her past, the choices she'd made to survive. She hurried to prepare the other rooms, pushing thoughts of blue eyes and deep voices from her mind. She had built walls around herself for good reasons, and no passing cowboy would breach them, no matter how polite or handsome. The next morning dawned hot and cloudless, promising another scorching day. Sadie was up before the sun, helping Mrs. Holloway prepare breakfast for their guests. The Cowboys had arrived late the previous evening, a rowdy but generally well-behaved bunch who'd followed their foreman's instructions about removing boots with only minimal grumbling. As she placed platters of eggs and bacon on the long dining table, Sadie heard the men's voices approaching. She straightened her apron and adopted the blank expression she always wore when serving guests. Preston Evans entered first, followed by 5 trail-worn cowboys of varying ages. They filled the room with their presence, the smell of leather and horses, the jingle of spurs, the rough cadence of their speech. Evans nodded politely to Sadie before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Looks mighty fine, miss," said one of the younger cowboys, tipping his hat to her. "Thank you," she replied, not meeting his eyes as she continued setting out plates. Breakfast proceeded without incident, the men focused on sating their hunger after weeks of trail cooking. Sadie moved efficiently around the table, refilling coffee cups and bringing extra biscuits. She was accustomed to being essentially invisible while performing such tasks, a convenience for both her and the men she served, so she was startled when Preston Evans directly addressed her as she poured his coffee. "Miss Thompson, how long have you lived in Naco?" The question drew the attention of the other cowboys, and Sadie felt herself stiffen under their collective gaze. 3 years, she answered shortly, and before that, he persisted, various places. She moved to refill another cup, but Evans wasn't finished. "We'll be in town for at least 2 weeks while we negotiate with some buyers from Mexico," he said. "I wonder if you might recommend some places of interest in the area," one of the cowboys snickered, and Evans shot him a quelling look. "There's not much to see in Naco, Mr. Evans," Sadie replied. "Most find all the entertainment they need at Malone's saloon." "I've had my fill of saloons on this drive," he said. "I was thinking more along the lines of natural wonders. I hear there are some impressive caverns not far from here." "The Coronado Cave is about a day's ride," she conceded. "Some find it worth the journey." He smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face. "Thank you. Perhaps someone local could be persuaded to guide me there someday." Before she could respond, Mrs. Holloway called from the kitchen, and Sadie gratefully retreated from the dining room, feeling the weight of Preston Evans' gaze on her back. The days fell into a pattern. The Cowboys would leave early to tend to their cattle and conduct business, returning in time for the evening meal. Most would then head to Malone's saloon, though Evans frequently remained behind, sometimes sitting on the front porch with a book, a sight unusual enough to draw curious glances from passers-by. Sadie did her best to maintain a professional distance, but it proved increasingly difficult. Unlike his men, Evans seemed to make a point of engaging her in conversation whenever the opportunity arose. His questions were never inappropriate, merely friendly inquiries about the town or her opinions on simple matters like the weather or the quality of the local general store. A week into their stay, Sadie was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard the gate creak open. She turned to find Preston Evans entering, carrying what appeared to be a broken bridle. "Pardon the intrusion, Miss Thompson," he said. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you're skilled with a needle and might be able to repair this." Sadie eyed the torn leather. "I mostly mend clothing, Mr. Evans. Of course." He looked disappointed. "I should have realized, but I can try," she added, surprising herself. "Leave it on the bench there. I'll look at it when I'm finished here." His face brightened. "I appreciate that. It was my father's, so it has some value beyond its usefulness." Instead of leaving, he leaned against the fence, watching as she continued hanging sheets. "You work very hard, Miss Thompson." "Most people do," she replied, focusing on smoothing a wrinkle from the damp fabric. "True enough." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "But not everyone works with such precision. You approach every task as if it were important." Sadie pinned the last sheet to the line before turning to face him. "In my experience, Mr. Evans, doing a job well is the surest way to keep it." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, because his expression softened with understanding. "You've had to fight for everything, haven't you?" The question was too direct, too perceptive. Sadie felt her defenses rise. "I should get back inside," she said, gathering her empty basket. "I'll look at your bridle this evening." He straightened, putting his hat back on. "I've offended you." "I apologize." "No offense taken," she said stiffly, "but I do have work to complete, of course." He stepped aside to let her pass. "For what it's worth, Miss Thompson, I admire resilience. It's a quality too rare in this world." Sadie hurried inside without responding, her heart beating unusually fast. Preston Evans was becoming dangerous not because he was forward or inappropriate, but because he seemed genuinely interested in her as a person. And that was something Sadie couldn't afford. That evening, after finishing her duties, Sadie sat in the small back parlor that served as her private workroom and examined the bridle. The stitching had come loose where the leather was worn thin from years of use. It would be challenging to repair without the proper tools, but not impossible. As she worked, she heard footsteps in the hallway, then a soft knock at the open door. "May I come in?" Preston Evans asked. Sadie hesitated, then nodded. "I've just started on your bridle." He entered, taking the chair across from her small work table. "No rush. We won't be leaving for at least another week." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the soft creak of leather as Sadie worked her needle through the tough material. "Where did you learn to do that?" he finally asked. "My father was a saddle maker in St. Louis," she answered, surprising herself with the personal revelation. "I used to help in his shop." "And what brought you from St. Louis to Naco?" Sadie's hands stilled. "Life, Mr. Evans. Life takes unexpected turns," he nodded, not pressing further. "Call me Preston, please." "Mr. Evans makes me feel like my father." She resumed her work without acknowledging the request. After another moment of silence, he spoke again. "I grew up on a small ranch in East Texas. My father built it from nothing, working himself to an early grave in the process. I've been driving cattle since I was 16. "And now you're a foreman," Sadie observed. "Owner, actually." When she looked up in surprise, he smiled. "The herd is mine. I've built it up over the last decade, buying when I could, breeding smart." "That's impressive," Sadie admitted. "It's a start," he said. "I'm hoping these Mexican buyers will help me expand further. There's good money in breeding stock these days, better than in beef cattle if you know what you're doing." His obvious passion for his work was engaging, and Sadie found herself asking questions about his operation. Before long, they were having a genuine conversation, with Preston explaining the intricacies of cattle breeding and Sadie sharing her observations of the local economy. When the grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, Sadie was startled to realize how much time had passed. "I've kept you too long," Preston said, rising, "and you've been working the whole time." "It's finished anyway," she replied, tying off the last stitch and cutting the thread. She handed him the bridle. "It should hold now, though the leather is quite worn in places." He examined her work with obvious appreciation. "This is expert craftsmanship, Sadie, thank you." The use of her first name should have bothered her, but somehow it didn't. "You're welcome, Preston." His smile was warm, and for a moment they simply looked at each other in the soft lamplight. Then Sadie stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Mr. Evans." He accepted the dismissal gracefully. "Good night, Miss Thompson. Thank you again for your help." After he left, Sadie remained in the workroom for a long time, trying to understand the unfamiliar feeling expanding in her chest. It felt dangerously like hope, and hope was something she'd abandoned years ago. The next day passed in a flurry of activity. A dust storm had blown through overnight, covering everything in a layer of fine grit that required extensive cleaning. Sadie barely saw Preston or his men, who had left before dawn for a meeting with the Mexican buyers. By evening, she was exhausted, her back aching from hours of scrubbing and sweeping. After serving dinner to the few guests who remained at the boarding house, she slipped out to the back porch for a moment of solitude. The night was clear, the desert stars brilliant against the black sky. Sadie leaned against the porch rail, breathing deeply. These rare moments of peace were precious to her time to simply exist without expectations or demands. "Beautiful night." She jumped at the voice, turning to find Preston standing at the corner of the porch, a pipe in his hand. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine," she replied, regaining her composure. "I thought you'd be at Malone's with your men, celebrating your business dealings." He came to stand beside her, though he maintained a respectful distance. "The negotiations went well, but I've never been one for raucous celebration. I prefer quieter satisfaction." "Is that why you read books instead of playing poker?" The question slipped out before she could consider it. Preston chuckled. "Partly. I also believe in continuous improvement." "A man should learn something new every day, don't you think?" "I haven't had much time for learning beyond practical matters," Sadie admitted. "Yet you speak like an educated woman," he observed. "Your vocabulary, your diction, they reveal more than you perhaps intend." Sadie stiffened. "My father believed in education, even for daughters, but that was a lifetime ago." Preston seemed to sense her withdrawal and changed the subject. "I was wondering if you might reconsider showing me those caverns you mentioned." "My business is concluded, and I find myself with a few days of freedom before we begin the drive north. I'm not sure Mrs. Halloway would approve of me taking a day away from my duties." "I've already spoken with her," he said. "She agreed you could be spared for a day, provided we take a proper chaperone." Sadie raised her eyebrows. "And who did you have in mind for that role?" "Sheriff Mason has offered to accompany us. He says he hasn't visited the caverns in years and would welcome the excuse." The idea was tempting, a day away from endless chores, out in the open desert, and with the sheriff along, there could be no question of impropriety. "When were you thinking of going?" "The day after tomorrow, if that suits." Sadie hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, Mr. Evans. I'll show you the Coronado Cave." His smile was worth the momentary abandonment of her caution. "Thank you, Miss Thompson. I look forward to it." 2 days later, Sadie found herself riding alongside Preston and Sheriff Mason on the trail to Coronado Cave. Mrs. Halloway had surprised her with the loan of a proper riding dress, navy blue, with a sensible split skirt that allowed her to ride astride rather than side saddle. The day was perfect for riding, with clear skies and a gentle breeze that kept the heat bearable. Sheriff Mason led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the region's history. Preston rode beside Sadie, their horses falling naturally into the same pace. "You're an experienced rider," he observed as she easily guided her mount around a rocky outcropping. "I grew up riding," she replied. "My grandfather had a farm outside St. Louis where I spent my summers. And yet you chose town life over country living." "I didn't exactly choose," she said, her voice tightening. "Life chose for me," Preston nodded, not pressing further. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a desert bird the only interruptions. Around midday, they reached the mouth of the cave. Sheriff Mason helped them secure the horses in a shaded area with access to the small spring that emerged from the rocky hillside. "I'll get a fire going for some coffee," the sheriff announced. "You two can explore the main chamber if you like, just don't go too deep without proper lighting." Preston offered Sadie his arm as they approached the cave entrance. "Shall we?" She hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on his forearm. The contact, even through layers of clothing, sent an unexpected warmth through her. The cave entrance opened into a large chamber where enough light filtered through to illuminate the spectacular formations. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone icicles, while stalagmites reached upward from the floor, creating eerie, beautiful sculptures. "It's magnificent," Preston breathed, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Yes," Sadie agreed, gazing upward at the glittering mineral deposits that caught what little light penetrated the chamber. "I've only been here once before, but it left an impression." They wandered through the main chamber, occasionally touching the cool, damp stone walls or pausing to admire particularly striking formations. Preston maintained a respectful distance, yet Sadie was acutely aware of his presence, the sound of his footsteps, the occasional brush of his sleeve against hers when the path narrowed. "Who brought you here before?" he asked as they paused beside a crystal-clear pool that reflected their faces like a mirror. "The town doctor and his wife," Sadie replied. "Dr. Wilson treated me when I first arrived in Naco, quite ill from the journey. His wife, Eliza, took a liking to me and helped me secure my position with Mrs. Halloway. They sound like good people." "They were," Sadie said softly. "They died in the fever outbreak 2 winters ago." Preston's expression grew solemn. "I'm sorry, were there many losses?" "Nearly 30, mostly children and the elderly." Sadie swallowed hard, remembering the terrible weeks of sickness and death. "The Wilsons worked themselves to exhaustion caring for the sick. In the end, they had no strength left to fight when the fever took them." Without warning, tears filled her eyes. She turned away quickly, embarrassed by the sudden display of emotion. Preston gently touched her shoulder. "You cared for them." "They were kind to me when kindness was rare," she admitted, wiping her eyes. "They asked nothing in return." "The best people rarely do," he said quietly. Sadie composed herself, uncomfortable with her momentary vulnerability. "We should rejoin the sheriff. He'll wonder what's keeping us." Preston nodded, but as they turned to leave, he asked, "What brought you to Naco in such poor health, Sadie?" "What were you running from?" The directness of the question startled her. "What makes you think I was running?" "Experience," he replied simply. "I recognize the look of someone who's left trouble behind. I've worn it myself." Sadie studied his face, seeing only genuine interest, not judgment. Still, she wasn't ready to share her past with anyone, least of all this man who was stirring feelings she'd thought long dead. "We should go," she repeated, moving toward the cave entrance. Outside, Sheriff Mason had coffee brewing and beans warming in a small pot over the fire. They ate a simple meal, the conversation turning to safer topics: the weather, local politics, Preston's cattle business. But Sadie caught him watching her thoughtfully several times and knew her evasion had only heightened his curiosity. The ride back to Naco was quieter, all three tired from the day's excursion. As they approached the town, the sheriff rode ahead, mentioning business at his office. Alone with Preston for the first time all day, Sadie felt strangely nervous. They rode side by side down Naco's main street as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty road. "Thank you for today," Preston said as they reached the boarding house. "It was everything I hoped for and more." "The caverns are impressive," Sadie agreed, dismounting with his assistants. "I wasn't referring only to the caverns." His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "Your company made the day special, Sadie." She felt her cheeks warm. "You're too kind, Mr. Evans." "Back to Mr. Evans, are we?" He smiled, but there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. "It seems appropriate now that we're back in town." She smoothed her riding skirt, avoiding his gaze. "Of course." He took the reins of her horse. "I'll see to the horses. You should rest, it's been a long day." Sadie nodded, suddenly reluctant to end their time together despite her earlier discomfort. "Thank you for arranging the trip. It was pleasant, high praise indeed from Miss Thompson," he teased gently. "Perhaps next time I can aspire to enjoyable or even delightful." "You're assuming there will be a next time," she countered, finding herself responding to his teasing despite her best intentions. "I live in hope," he replied, his expression growing serious. "Good evening, Sadie." She watched him lead the horses toward the livery stable, confusion swirling in her mind. Preston Evans was unlike any man she'd known, respectful yet persistent, intelligent yet unpretentious. And the way he looked at her made her feel worthy of attention in a way she hadn't experienced in years. But any connection between them was temporary. He would leave with his cattle drive and she would remain in Naco, continuing her quiet existence. To imagine anything else was foolish. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, Sadie found herself recalling every moment of their day together, every smile, every conversation. And for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if the next few days brought a flurry of activity to the boarding house? A stage had overturned outside town, and several of the passengers were staying while repairs were made. Sadie was kept busy from dawn until well after dusk, leaving little time for personal interactions with any of the guests, including Preston. She saw him at mealtimes, of course, and occasionally passed him in the hallway or on the porch, but their exchanges were limited to polite greetings. If he was disappointed by the sudden distance between them, he didn't show it, maintaining his usual courteous demeanor. 4 days after their excursion to the caverns, Sadie was working late in the kitchen, preparing bread dough for the next morning's baking. The house was quiet, most guests having retired for the night. Mrs. Holloway had gone to bed early with one of her headaches, leaving Sadie to finish the evening chores. She was kneading the dough with perhaps more vigor than necessary, working out the frustrations of a particularly demanding day when she heard the back door open. Turning, she saw Preston entering with an armload of firewood. "I noticed the wood box was getting low," he explained, setting the logs carefully in the large box beside the stove. "Thought I'd save you a trip to the woodpile." "Thank you," Sadie said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gesture. "That was kind." "Not at all." He brushed wood chips from his shirt. "It's the least I could do after you spent a day showing me the caverns." Sadie returned to her kneading, suddenly conscious of her flour-covered apron and loose tendrils of hair escaping from her bun. "When do you leave Naco?" "Day after tomorrow," he replied, leaning against the doorframe. "The cattle are rested and we've finalized arrangements with the Mexican buyers for next season. I'm sure you're eager to get home." "To my ranch, yes," he paused, "though I find myself reluctant to leave Naco behind entirely." Sadie concentrated on shaping the dough into loaves, not trusting herself to respond to the implication in his words. "I've enjoyed getting to know you, Sadie," he continued when she remained silent. "More than I expected to enjoy anything on this trip." "You've been a pleasant guest, Mr. Evans," she replied formally. "Mrs. Holloway will be sorry to see you go, and you," he moved closer until he was standing on the other side of the work table. "Will you be sorry to see me go?" Sadie kept her eyes on her task, carefully placing the shaped dough into waiting pans. "It's not my place to have opinions on the comings and goings of guests. I'm not asking the boarding house assistant," he said softly. "I'm asking Sadie Thompson, the woman who showed me ancient caverns and spoke of the stars with such knowledge. The woman who mended my father's bridle with the skill of a master craftsman. The woman who tries so hard to be invisible but shines too brightly to be overlooked." His words pierced the armor she'd built around her heart. Sadie looked up, meeting his intense blue gaze across the table. "What do you want from me, Preston?" To know you, he answered simply. To understand what brought you here, what keeps you here, to learn what dreams you've set aside. Why? The question emerged as little more than a whisper. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment we met. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. Because there's something between us, something rare and worth exploring. Sadie felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. How long had it been since anyone had seen her as more than just a servant or a function? How long since anyone had looked at her with such genuine interest? You don't know me, she said, withdrawing her hands from the table. If you did, you wouldn't what? He pressed when she faltered, wouldn't speak of dreams or possibilities. She wiped her hands on her apron, needing distance from his intensity. I'm not what you think I am, Preston. Then tell me who you are, he urged. Let me decide for myself. The temptation to unburden herself was powerful. For one wild moment, Sadie considered telling him everything about St. Louis, about Chicago, about the desperate choices and the years of shame, but self-preservation won out. I need to finish here, she said, gesturing to the bread. It's late. Preston straightened, disappointment evident in his expression, though he tried to hide it. Of course, I didn't mean to keep you from your work. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'll be leaving at dawn the day after tomorrow. If you'd like to talk before then about anything at all, I'll be here. After he left, Sadie placed the bread pans in the warming oven and sank into a chair, her hands trembling. Preston Evans was offering her something she'd convinced herself she'd never have again: connection, understanding, perhaps even affection. But accepting would mean revealing her past, and she wasn't ready for the rejection that would surely follow. Better to let him leave with his idealized image of her intact than to see his eyes fill with disgust when he learned the truth. Better to preserve this brief interlude of being valued than to risk having it shattered by reality. Yet as she finished her tasks and made her way to her small room, Sadie couldn't help wondering if she was making the right choice. What if, just this once, the truth didn't drive someone away? What if Preston Evans was different from the others? Sleep eluded her that night as she wrestled with possibilities and fears. By morning, she had made no decision, choosing instead to bury herself in work and avoid any situation that might place her alone with Preston. The strategy worked through most of the day. Mrs. Holloway kept Sadie busy with a thorough cleaning of the dining room, and Preston was occupied with final preparations for his departure. They passed each other occasionally, exchanging nothing more than polite nods. By evening, however, circumstances conspired against her avoidance tactics. Mrs. Holloway announced at dinner that she would be attending a church meeting, leaving Sadie to oversee the evening meal and cleanup. With several guests out for the evening and others retired to their rooms, Sadie found herself alone in the dining room with Preston as she cleared the last of the dishes. "May I help?" he asked, rising from his seat. "That's not necessary," she replied, balancing a stack of plates. "I insist." He gathered the remaining silverware. "My mother raised me to be useful, not decorative." Despite her determination to maintain distance, Sadie found herself smiling at his comment. "I doubt Mrs. Holloway would approve of guests doing servants' work." "Then we won't tell her," he countered, following Sadie to the kitchen with his handful of utensils. They worked together in companionable silence for a few minutes, Preston washing dishes while Sadie dried and put them away. The domestic scene felt strangely natural, as if they'd performed this ritual together many times before. "You never answered my question," Preston said as he handed her the last clean plate. "Which one?" Sadie asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "Will you be sorry to see me go?" She placed the plate in the cupboard, taking her time before turning to face him. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I will be sorry," his expression softened. "Then come with me, Sadie." The unexpected invitation left her speechless. "I mean it," he continued, encouraged by her silence. "Come to Texas. My ranch is modest but growing. There's a small house, comfortable enough for now, though I plan to build something more substantial eventually. It's peaceful there with good neighbors and a decent town nearby." "You can't be serious," she managed to say. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he insisted. I know you're intelligent, hardworking, and kind despite whatever hardships you've endured. I know you appreciate beauty in stars and caves and simple things. I know I've never met anyone who makes me feel the way you do." "And what way is that?" she asked, her heart racing. "Alive," he said simply. "More fully alive than I've felt in years." Sadie shook her head, overwhelmed by his words and the intensity of his gaze. "You're caught up in some romantic fantasy, Preston. I'm a boarding house maid with a past you know nothing about." "Then tell me," he urged, stepping closer. "Whatever it is, it can't change what I feel for you." "You're wrong," she whispered, backing away until she felt the edge of the counter behind her. "Some things can't be forgiven or overlooked. Try me." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've lived 34 years in this world, Sadie. I've seen men at their worst and their best. Whatever you've done or whatever's been done to you, I'm not easily shocked." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility and fear. Sadie looked into Preston's eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and something that might, terrifyingly, be the beginning of love. "I was married," she began, the words feeling rusty from disuse. "At 19, to a man my father's age who owned a shipping business in St. Louis. My father had died, leaving us with debts. The marriage was arranged to save our family home and my mother's security." Preston listened without interruption, his expression encouraging her to continue. "Robert was controlling, obsessively so. He monitored my every movement, chose my clothing, selected which books I could read." She swallowed hard, the memories still painful after all these years. "When I objected or tried to assert myself, he would." She gestured vaguely, unwilling to detail the violence. "He hurt you?" Preston stated, anger flashing in his eyes. "Yes," she acknowledged. "For 3 years I endured it, believing I had no choice. Then my mother died, and with her gone, I finally found the courage to leave. I fled to Chicago with what little money I'd managed to hide away." She paused, gathering strength for the most difficult part of her story. "Chicago was overwhelming. My money ran out quickly, and I had no skills that anyone valued. I couldn't return to St. Louis where Robert still had influence. I was desperate, alone." She met Preston's eyes directly. "I did what I had to do to survive." Understanding dawned in his expression. "You worked in a house of ill repute." "Yes." The admission hung in the air between them. "For 2 years, until the establishment was raided and I was arrested. After my release, I came west, determined to start over where no one knew my past." She straightened, lifting her chin. "So you see, Mr. Evans, I'm not the respectable woman you've imagined. I'm used goods, damaged by life and my own choices. Whatever you think you feel for me is based on an illusion." Preston was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Sadie braced herself for his disgust, his withdrawal, the inevitable rejection. Instead, he moved closer, his voice low and fervent. "Then let me show you what worth feels like." Sadie stared at him, unable to process his words. "Did you hear what I said, what I was?" "I heard that you survived," he replied. "I heard that you escaped an abusive marriage and did what was necessary when abandoned by society and family. I heard the story of a woman of extraordinary courage and resilience." Tears filled Sadie's eyes, but she blinked them back. "You can't simply dismiss my past. People would talk. It would reflect on you, on your business." "Let them talk," Preston said firmly. "My nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and I've never much cared for gossip anyway." He reached out, hesitating until she nodded slightly, then gently took her hand in his. "Your past has shaped you, Sadie, but it doesn't define you, not unless you let it." "It's not that simple," she whispered, though his words were piercing the armor of shame she'd worn for so long. "No," he agreed. "It's not simple, life rarely is, but I know what I want, and that's a chance to know you better, to see if what I feel for you can grow into something lasting." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking for promises, just come to Texas, visit for a month. If you're unhappy or uncomfortable, I'll personally escort you back to Naco or anywhere else you wish to go. You have my word." The offer was tempting more than tempting. To leave Naco, to start fresh yet again, but this time with someone who knew her past and accepted her anyway. It seemed too good to be true. "I need time to think," she said finally. Preston nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Of course. We leave at dawn the day after tomorrow." If you decide to come, be ready then. If not." He smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "If not, I'll understand, but I won't forget you, Sadie Thompson." He left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by clean dishes and swirling emotions. For the first time in years, Sadie allowed herself to imagine a different future, one with companionship, perhaps even love. One where her past was acknowledged but not defining. One where she might finally find peace. But was it real? Or was Preston Evans simply a kind man caught up in romantic notions that would dissipate once the reality of her history truly sank in? She had one day to decide whether to trust his words or her own bitter experience. One day to choose between the safety of her established life and the terrifying possibility of happiness. The next day passed in a blur of activity. Sadie moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind consumed with the decision before her. Mrs. Holloway noticed her distraction, but attributed it to fatigue and granted her an early evening. In her room, Sadie sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the small collection of possessions she'd accumulated during her time in Naco. 3 dresses hanging neatly in the wardrobe. A brush and comb set that had been a gift from Eliza Wilson. A small box containing her mother's wedding ring and a faded photograph. A few books, well worn from repeated reading. It wasn't much to show for 32 years of life. Nothing to hold her here except habit and the security of the familiar. A soft knock at her door startled her from her contemplation. She opened it to find Mrs. Holloway standing there, a concerned expression on her normally stern face. "May I come in, Sadie?" the older woman asked. "Of course, madam." Sadie stepped back, allowing Mrs. Holloway to enter the small room. The boarding house proprietor sat in the room's only chair, studying Sadie thoughtfully. "You've been distracted today. I wonder if it has anything to do with Mr. Evans' imminent departure." Sadie felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sorry if my work has suffered." Mrs. Holloway waved away her concern. "Your work is always exemplary. That's not why I'm here." She sighed, her expression softening. "I've seen how he looks at you, Sadie, and how you look at him when you think no one notices." Unsure how to respond, Sadie remained silent. "Has he asked you to go with him?" Mrs. Holloway inquired directly. Sadie nodded, surprised by the older woman's perception. "And you're considering it?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," Sadie admitted, "though I don't know if I should." Mrs. Holloway nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "I've employed many girls over the years, Sadie. Most come and go, but a few like you stay longer. I make it a point not to pry into their pasts, but I recognize certain signs." She looked at Sadie with unexpected kindness. "You came to Naco running from something, didn't you? Something that still haunts you." "Yes," Sadie whispered, "and you've told Mr. Evans about this past." "I have." "Yet he still wants you to accompany him." Sadie nodded, still amazed by Preston's reaction to her confession. Mrs. Holloway smiled, an expression that transformed her usually stern face. "Then he's either a fool or a man of exceptional character. From my observations, I believe it's the latter." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "I didn't marry until I was 40, Sadie. I had convinced myself that no decent man would want me, given certain indiscretions in my youth. Then I met Mr. Holloway, who cared more about who I had become than who I had been." Sadie stared at the older woman in surprise. Mrs. Holloway had always seemed the epitome of propriety. "We had 12 good years before he passed," Mrs. Holloway continued. "Not nearly enough, but more happiness than I ever thought I'd have. I've never regretted taking that chance, even though it terrified me at the time." She moved to the door, then turned back. "Whatever you decide, your position here will remain open for 3 months. If things don't work out with Mr. Evans, you can return without question." Deeply moved by the unexpected support, Sadie found herself at a loss for words. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for everything. You're a good woman, Sadie Thompson. You deserve happiness." With that, Mrs. Holloway left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone again, Sadie sat on her bed, Mrs. Holloway's words echoing in her mind. The knowledge that she could return if necessary removed one significant obstacle to accepting Preston's offer. And the revelation about Mrs. Holloway's own past was both surprising and comforting proof that second chances were possible. that past mistakes needn't determine one's entire future. As night deepened outside her window, Sadie began to pack her few belongings, her decision solidifying with each item she carefully placed in her old carpet bag. Fear still lingered, but for the first time in years, hope was stronger. Dawn broke clear and cold the next morning. Sadie had risen an hour earlier, washing and dressing with special care. She wore her best dress, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her hair in a simple but flattering style. Mrs. Halloway met her in the kitchen, taking in the carpet bag without comment. "I've packed some food for your journey," she said, handing Sadie a bundle wrapped in cloth. "And your wages paid in full through yesterday." "Thank you," Sadie said, accepting the small envelope of money, "for everything." The older woman surprised her with a brief, tight hug. "Be happy, Sadie. That's all the thanks I need." Outside, Preston and his men were already preparing to depart. Horses were saddled, the pack mules loaded with supplies for the journey north. Preston stood talking with Sheriff Mason, but turned immediately when Sadie appeared on the porch. His expression of surprise and joy at the sight of her carpet bag was worth every moment of anxiety she'd experienced. He excused himself from the sheriff and approached her, hope written plainly on his face. "You're coming," he said, his voice containing a hint of disbelief. "If the offer still stands," she replied, suddenly shy. "It does." He took the carpet bag from her hand, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent warmth through her despite the morning chill. "Are you sure, Sadie? It's a long journey and Texas is very different from Arizona." "I'm not sure of anything," she admitted honestly. "Except that I want to find out if what's between us is real, if it's possible for someone like me to start over again." "It is," he assured her, his blue eyes intense with conviction. "And what's between us is the most real thing I've felt in years." One of the cowboys approached, leading a saddled mare. "All ready for the lady, boss." Preston nodded his thanks. "Sadie, this is Michael. He's been with me since the beginning, and he's my most trusted hand." The cowboy, older than the others with gray streaking his dark beard, tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, it'll be a pleasure having you along." As Michael moved away to give them privacy, Preston lowered his voice. "I've told them you're coming as my guest, with the possibility of a more permanent arrangement if we both wish it. Nothing more." "Thank you," she said, grateful for his discretion. He helped her mount the mare, adjusting the stirrups to suit her height. "She's gentle but sure-footed." "You'll get along fine." As the group prepared to depart, Sheriff Mason approached to say goodbye, followed by Mrs. Halloway. Both wished Sadie well with genuine warmth that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. For all its hardships, Naco had become a home of sorts, and these people something like family. Yet as they rode out of town, the rising sun at their backs, Sadie felt a sense of rightness in her decision. She guided her horse alongside Preston's, their shadows stretching long before them on the dusty trail. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, noticing her pensive expression. "No," she replied truthfully, "just appreciating the moment," he smiled, understanding in his eyes. "The first day of a journey is always special, full of possibilities." "And uncertainties," she added. "Those too," he acknowledged. "But we face them together now, that makes them less daunting, don't you think?" The simple statement struck Sadie with unexpected force. How long had it been since she'd faced anything with a partner at her side, since anyone had offered to share her burdens rather than add to them? "Yes," she agreed softly. "It does." They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a cowboy to the cattle creating a soothing backdrop. Sadie found herself relaxing into the journey, the tension of decision-making giving way to a cautious optimism. The days that followed fell into a pattern. They would rise before dawn, eat a simple breakfast, then ride until the heat of midday forced a rest. After a few hours' respite, they would continue until dusk, when the camp would be established for the night. Sadie quickly integrated into the routine, helping with meal preparation and other tasks. The cowboys, initially awkward around her, soon accepted her presence with casual respect. Michael, in particular, became a friendly ally, often sharing stories of his years working with Preston that revealed aspects of the rancher Sadie might not otherwise have seen. "He saved my life during a flash flood 3 years back," Michael told her one evening as they sat by the campfire. "Could have easily saved himself, but he wouldn't leave me behind even though I was pinned under a fallen tree." "That sounds like him," Sadie said, glancing across the camp to where Preston was checking on a calf that had seemed unwell earlier. "He's a good man," Michael affirmed. "Best I've known. Treats everyone fair, works harder than anyone, and never breaks his word." Such testimonials, combined with her own daily observations, steadily strengthened Sadie's conviction that she hadn't made a mistake in trusting Preston Evans. He was unfailingly considerate, never pressuring her for more than she was ready to give, yet making his growing affection clear in 100 small ways. He would bring her wildflowers gathered during his scouting rides, or point out particularly beautiful vistas as they traveled. In the evenings, he often sat beside her at the campfire, sometimes reading aloud from one of the books he carried in his saddlebags. And though he was careful never to compromise her reputation with the men, his eyes followed her with a warmth that made her feel treasured in a way she had never experienced before. As they crossed from Arizona into New Mexico, and then into the Texas Panhandle, Sadie found herself increasingly at ease with Preston and the simple life of the trail. The physical demands of the journey were substantial, but she welcomed the challenge, discovering a strength within herself she hadn't known she possessed. One evening, about 2 weeks into their journey, Preston suggested a short ride to a nearby ridge to watch the sunset. With Michael's knowing smile following them, they rode away from the camp, climbing the gentle slope to a vantage point that offered a spectacular view of the rolling plains stretching to the horizon. They dismounted, securing the horses to a scrubby bush, and Preston spread his coat on a flat rock for Sadie to sit on. The sunset was magnificent, painting the sky in shades of gold, orange, and deepening purple. But Sadie found her attention drawn more to the man beside her than to the natural spectacle before them. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, catching her gaze. "That I'm glad I came," she answered honestly. "These past weeks have been healing in a way I didn't expect." He smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been worried you might be regretting your decision." "No," she assured him. "No regrets." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Sadie, I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes. These weeks with you have confirmed what I suspected in Naco. What I feel for you is more than attraction or infatuation." His blue eyes held hers with unwavering intensity. "I'm falling in love with you." Though she had begun to hope for such a declaration, hearing the words aloud still took her breath away. "Preston, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I understand that you may not feel the same or that you might need more time. I just wanted you to know where I stand." "No expectations, no pressure." Sadie studied his face in the fading light, seeing only sincerity and an openness that continued to amaze her. This man, who knew the worst of her past, was offering his heart without reservation. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not of you, but of what I feel for you. It's been so long since I allowed myself to care for anyone this way." "I know," he said softly, "and I understand fear, Sadie. I've buried a wife and child. For years afterward, I couldn't imagine opening myself to that kind of potential pain again." This was the first time he'd mentioned a previous marriage, and Sadie found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to continue. "Catherine and our son died in childbirth 8 years ago," he explained, his eyes distant with remembered grief. "I was 26, full of dreams for our future together. When I lost them, I lost my way for a time." "I'm so sorry," Sadie said, squeezing his hand. He returned the pressure, his focus returning to her. "I tell you this not to burden you with old sorrows, but to help you understand that I know what it means to be afraid of loving again. To wonder if the risk is worth taking, and is it?" she asked, needing to hear his answer. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Even with all the uncertainty, all the potential for heartache, yes, it's worth it. Life without love is merely existence, Sadie, and I've existed long enough. His words resonated deeply, reflecting her own unspoken thoughts. For years, she had been existing, not living, going through the motions of life without truly engaging with it. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she confessed, the admission both terrifying and liberating. I've tried not to. I've told myself all the reasons it can't work, why I shouldn't trust these feelings, but they're there all the same. The joy that spread across Preston's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and profound in its significance. Sadie closed her eyes, surrendering to the sweetness of the moment. His hand cradled her cheek with exquisite tenderness, as if she were something infinitely precious. When they finally parted, she found herself trembling not with fear, but with a happiness so intense it was almost painful. "We should head back," Preston said reluctantly, glancing at the darkening sky. "The men will worry." "Yes," she agreed, though she was loath to break the spell of intimacy that had enveloped them. As they rode back to camp, their hands occasionally brushing between their mounts, Sadie felt as if she'd crossed some invisible threshold. The future still held uncertainties, but for the first time in years, she was looking forward to it with hope rather than dread. The remainder of the journey to Preston's ranch passed in a golden haze of deepening connection. They were careful to maintain propriety in front of the men, but their growing closeness was evident to all. Michael and the other cowboys exchanged knowing glances, but respected the developing relationship with a combination of discretion and quiet approval. Finally, nearly a month after leaving Naco, they crested a rise to see Preston's ranch spread out before them in a verdant valley. The main house was modest but well built, surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. A small creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. "Welcome to the Sunrise Ranch," Preston said, pride evident in his voice. "It's not much yet, but it's beautiful," Sadie interrupted sincerely. After weeks on the trail, the sight of the well-ordered ranch was like a vision of paradise. As they approached, a middle-aged couple emerged from the house the caretakers Preston had mentioned, who maintained the property during his absences. They greeted the returning party with evident joy, their welcome extending naturally to include Sadie once Preston introduced her as his special guest. "Martha will show you to your room," Preston told Sadie after the initial flurry of arrivals had settled. "It's the best guest room with a view of the sunrise that gives the ranch its name." Martha, a motherly woman with kind eyes, led Sadie to a pleasant room on the second floor of the house. The furnishings were simple but of good quality: a large bed with a handmade quilt, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk, and a rocking chair by the window. "The washroom is just across the hall," Martha explained, setting Sadie's carpet bag on a stand near the bed. "And I've heated water for a proper bath whenever you're ready." The mention of a real bath after weeks of makeshift washing in streams and with heated canteens nearly brought tears to Sadie's eyes. "That sounds heavenly," Martha smiled understandingly. "Trail life is hard, especially for a lady. You rest and refresh yourself. Dinner won't be for a couple of hours yet." Left alone, Sadie moved to the window, taking in the view of the ranch with its backdrop of rolling hills. It was a peaceful scene, so different from the dusty streets of Naco or the crowded neighborhoods of Chicago. She could imagine being happy here, building a life with Preston among these gentle landscapes. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. Despite their declarations on the trail, despite the growing certainty of her feelings, a part of her still whispered that it couldn't last, that sooner or later, reality would intrude on this dream of happiness. After her bath, a luxury so profound, she almost fell asleep in the warm water. Sadie changed into her cleanest dress and arranged her hair neatly. She wanted to look her best for this first evening in Preston's home, though she knew her trail-worn appearance was far from what she would have wished for such an occasion. When she descended to the main floor, she found Preston waiting for her at the foot of the stairs. He had also bathed and changed, his hair still damp, his usual trail clothes replaced with clean trousers and a fresh shirt. "You look beautiful," he said, his admiring gaze making her forget her concerns about her appearance. "As do you," she replied with a smile. "Though handsome might be the more appropriate term," he laughed, offering his arm. "I'll accept either from you. Would you like a tour of the house before dinner?" The house was larger than it had appeared from outside, with a spacious kitchen, dining room, study, and comfortable parlor on the main floor. Preston showed her each room with pride, occasionally pointing out features he had built himself or furnishings with special significance. In the study, he paused beside a small portrait on the desk. "Catherine," he said simply, allowing Sadie to look at the painted face of his late wife, a pretty young woman with blonde hair and a gentle smile. Sadie studied the portrait, touched by Preston's openness in sharing this aspect of his past. "She looks kind." "She was," he agreed. "She would have liked you, I think." The comment, offered with such straightforward sincerity, moved Sadie deeply. There was no jealousy or comparison in Preston's manner, only an acknowledgement of a love that had been real and the suggestion that there was room in his heart for both that memory and a new beginning. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Martha serving a hearty meal that tasted like heaven after weeks of trail cooking. Preston shared stories of the journey with Martha and her husband George, who had remained behind to care for the ranch. Sadie mostly listened, content to observe Preston in this setting that was clearly his natural element. After the meal, Preston suggested they sit on the front porch to enjoy the evening air. The night was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of grass and distant rain. They sat in comfortable rocking chairs, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. "Are you comfortable?" Preston asked after they had been sitting in companionable silence for some time. "Is there anything you need?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "Better than fine." "It's so peaceful here." "Yes," he agreed. "That's what I love most about it. After a day's work, no matter how demanding, I can sit here and find a kind of serenity I've never experienced anywhere else." He glanced at her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "I hope you'll come to feel the same way, Sadie. I want this to be a place where you feel safe and at peace." "It already feels that way," she admitted, "though it's strange to be in one place after so many weeks of travel." They fell silent again, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the chorus of insects, the occasional hoot of an owl. Sadie felt a contentment settling over her that was both unfamiliar and profoundly right. "I've been thinking," Preston said after a while, his voice thoughtful. "About our arrangement." Sadie tensed slightly, unsure where this was leading. "You agreed to come for a month," he continued, "to see if what's between us could grow into something lasting. That month is nearly up." "Yes," she acknowledged, her heart beginning to race. Preston turned to face her fully, his expression serious but warm. "I don't want to pressure you, Sadie. If you need more time to decide, or if you've found that this life isn't what you want, I'll honor our agreement and take you wherever you wish to go." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "But I need you to know that my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've deepened during our journey. I love you, Sadie Thompson, and I would be the happiest of men if you would consider making your stay here permanent." Though she had begun to anticipate such a declaration, hearing it stated so plainly still took her breath away. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston?" "I am," he confirmed, reaching across to take her hand. "Though I recognize it may seem sudden to others, I know my own heart, Sadie. I want to share my life with you, to build something lasting together, but only if that's what you want too." Sadie looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers smaller but also marked by years of work. There was a rightness to the way they fit together, a symbolism that wasn't lost on her. "I want to say yes," she said softly, "but I'm afraid." "Of what?" he asked gently. "Of the past catching up to us, of someone recognizing me someday and bringing scandal to your door. Of failing you in some way I can't yet imagine." She met his gaze directly. "I love you, Preston, enough to want to protect you from the consequences of loving me back." He smiled, a tender expression that made her heart ache. Sadie, don't you think I've considered all of that? The past is the past. If trouble comes, we'll face it together. As for failing me, he shook his head. The only way you could fail me is by walking away when we both know what we feel for each other is real and worth fighting for. His words penetrated the last of her defenses, dissolving the fear that had held her captive for so long. Preston was offering not just love but partnership, a sharing of burdens and joys, challenges and triumphs. Then yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I'll marry you, Preston Evans. The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the horizon, powerful, transformative, full of promise. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet and into his embrace. Thank you, he whispered against her hair, for trusting me, for giving us this chance. As his lips found hers in a kiss that sealed their commitment, Sadie felt the last shadows of her past receding. They would never fully disappear. The experiences that had shaped her would always be part of her story, but they no longer defined her or limited her future. In Preston's arms, with the vast Texas sky stretching above them and the solid ground of the Sunrise Ranch beneath their feet, Sadie Thompson finally understood what worth truly felt like. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in the nearby town of Cedar Springs. Martha had helped Sadie sew a wedding dress of ivory silk, simple but elegant. Preston wore his best suit, his face solemn with joy as they exchanged vows before the minister and a small gathering of neighbors and friends. Michael served as best man, his weathered face beaming with approval as he watched his boss and friend pledge his life to the woman who had so unexpectedly joined their cattle drive. The other ranch hands attended as well, cleaned up and awkwardly formal in their Sunday best, but genuinely happy for the couple they had come to respect. After the ceremony, everyone returned to the ranch for a celebration that lasted well into the evening. There was music and dancing, abundant food, and toasts to the health and happiness of the newlyweds. As Preston led Sadie in a dance on the makeshift floor set up in the yard, she felt a sense of belonging she had thought forever beyond her reach. Happy, Mrs. Evans? Preston asked, his blue eyes tender as they moved to the sweet strains of a fiddle. More than I ever thought possible, she replied truthfully. Later, when the guests had departed and they were finally alone in the master bedroom, now their shared space, Preston took her hands in his with an expression of such reverence that Sadie felt tears spring to her eyes. I want you to know something, he said softly. This marriage, our life together, it's a fresh beginning for both of us. The past has shaped us, but it doesn't control our future. From this day forward, we write our own story. The understanding in his eyes, the complete acceptance of all that she had been and all that she could become, was the greatest gift Sadie had ever received. As they came together as husband and wife for the first time, she surrendered not just her body but the last remnants of shame and unworthiness that had haunted her for so long. In Preston's arms, she wasn't used goods or damaged by her past. She was simply Sadie, loved, valued, and finally home. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also joy beyond measure. Under their combined efforts, the Sunrise Ranch prospered and grew. Preston's breeding program gained recognition throughout Texas and beyond, bringing financial security and respect in the community. Sadie found her place not just as Preston's wife, but as a full partner in their enterprise. Her meticulous record-keeping and natural business acumen complemented Preston's practical knowledge of cattle and land management. Together, they built something neither could have achieved alone. 2 years after their wedding, their first child was born, a son they named James, after Preston's father. The boy had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, a combination that filled them both with pride and occasionally exasperation as he grew from infancy into an adventurous toddler. When James was 3, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth, named for Sadie's mother. With her arrival, the family circle felt complete, though Preston sometimes hinted that he wouldn't mind another son to help with the ranch someday. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Preston presented Sadie with a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, intricately worked into the shape of a sunrise. To commemorate 5 years of new beginnings, he explained as he fastened the chain around her neck. Sadie touched the pendant, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful, Preston, thank you." He pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her shoulders. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us. These have been the happiest years of my life." "And mine," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined such happiness was possible." As they watched James chasing a butterfly with Elizabeth toddling determinedly after her brother, Sadie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young bride fleeing an abusive husband to the confident woman she had become, wife, mother, respected member of the community, valued partner in a thriving business. The path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been moments of doubt, occasions when the shadows of the past had threatened to darken her present joy. But through it all, Preston had stood beside her, his love unwavering, his belief in her worth a constant that had allowed her to finally believe in it herself. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Sadie smiled, turning to meet his gaze, still as blue, still as kind as the day they'd met in the boarding house in Naco. "I was thinking about worth and how you taught me to recognize my own." He squeezed her hand, understanding the depth behind her simple words. "You always had worth, Sadie. You just needed someone to remind you." "And I'm grateful every day that it was you," she replied, leaning in to kiss him softly. As the Texas sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Sadie Evans felt a profound contentment settle in her soul. The woman who had once called herself used goods had found not just love but redemption, not just acceptance but celebration of all that she was and all that she could be. In Preston's love, in their children's laughter, in the life they had built together, she had discovered the true meaning of worth not as something bestowed by others or determined by the past, but as an inherent quality that had always been within her, waiting to be recognized and embraced. And as Preston's arms tightened around her, as James's delighted laughter rang out across the yard, as Elizabeth's small face turned up to the colorful sky in wonder, Sadie knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this family, this love was worth everything she had endured to find it. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the land that had become her home, and Sadie Thompson Evans, once broken but now whole, once lost but now found, once ashamed but now proud, watched the day end with a heart full of gratitude, and the knowledge that tomorrow's sunrise would bring yet another day of the happiness she had finally allowed herself to claim.